Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be telling you about the 8 books that I finished in November. Okay, so the first book I read is called Bullshit Jobs. Honestly, I hated this book. I thought it was super boring. So this book is essentially an expansion on an essay that the author wrote some amount of years ago. And basically the concept of bullshit jobs is there's a certain percentage of jobs, like professions out there, that are just meaningless, that are completely pointless, that for some reason they exist for some sort of bureaucratic reason or legacy reason or some reason, but the point is they add no value to the company or society. They're just completely pointless. And to be honest, I think the concept is kind of interesting, but basically what this book was for me is spending 300 pages reading about jobs that are meaningless, which I thought was kind of just like a meaningless experience in and of itself. And then on top of that, the language written is very academic sounding, and it just was kind of a slog to get through. I probably should have DNF'd this one, but I know a lot of people like this book. There are some good reviews on it. So if this concept sounds interesting to you, maybe check it out. But personally, it just was not for me. The next book I read was actually on Audible, and it was The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. This is the very first Karen Slaughter book that I've ever read, but I've heard good things about her, so I wanted to pick up one of her books. This book I ended up giving a 3.5 stars that I rounded up to 4 stars on GoodReads. It was a solid read. It was essentially about 2 sisters who go through some traumatic experiences in their childhood, and then it follows them kind of into their adulthood, like 25 or 30 years later, when they kind of get themselves wrapped up in some traumatic situations again. So it kind of follows them throughout their life and kind of shows the impact of those earlier traumatic things that happened to them. I thought it was a solid read. It was entertaining. The things I didn't like about it wasn't super atmospheric. Like, it was kind of more matter of fact kind of writing that I feel like was kind of missing something a little bit from the writing perspective that I didn't quite vibe with. And then the other thing that I didn't like about it was the ending, kind of like the twist. Part of the twist was a little bit like out of place to me. Like, I had to kind of keep asking myself, wait, what just happened? But not in a good way. Like, I was like, what happened? Because I don't understand. Like, I can't like remember everything that's going on. And so part of it was just a little bit confusing to me, but still I think it was a solid, entertaining read. So 4 stars on GoodReads. And the next book I read was The Water Dancer. This one has been a super hyped up book. I think it was Oprah's book club one of these last few months. So clearly this book is well loved by many people. Unfortunately, I was not one of them. I gave this book a 2 stars on GoodReads for a few reasons. I think the primary reason was this book was just very, very slow and very boring in my opinion. I couldn't get into it. It was kind of one of those books where I would read a full page and then realize that I literally had not absorbed anything. Like, I was just glazing over the pages because I was just not into it. There was also an element of magical realism that I just wasn't that into. And then finally, the writing style just was very sophisticated and kind of academic sounding. I had to look up so many words in this book that I didn't know. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the fact that the plot was very slow, and then on top of it, you have this like very like sophisticated writing style that kind of made it even slower to get through. Just, I don't know, just really wasn't working for me. Now, all that being said, I think this book is worth the hype in the sense that it talks about a lot of really important issues. It talks about the Underground Railroad. It talks about a lot of issues related to race and slavery in the history of the United States. So I think this book still has a place in literature as an important thing to read. It's the kind of book that I think will end up in like high school reading lists. It's that kind of book. And unfortunately, it just kind of felt more like homework to me. So I just wasn't into it. But that was the third one. And the next book I read was a book on Audible called The Next Pandemic. And it's a nonfiction book written by a disease expert. And it essentially talks about the history of some pandemics and disease that have happened in the world. And I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a solid read. I thought there were a lot of interesting stories in it about the author's life and about his work, and it was actually more interesting than I was expecting. Now, the reason I only gave it 3 stars is I feel like towards the end it got a little bit more boring, maybe. Like, it just kind of felt a little bit more repetitive. But that being said, I still learned a lot. I thought it was a good read, especially if you are interested in that kind of thing. However, I would probably stay away from it if you are more squeamish, or if you're scared of like germs and disease and you're like more of a germaphobe. It does kind of scare you about all of the diseases that are out there and kind of how easy they are to spread and manifest. So yeah. The next book I read was The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. This book, I did a whole separate review. I did a 3-minute thriller review on this. So if you want to hear all my thoughts, then go check out that video. But long story short, I did give it a solid 4 stars. I think this is a pretty good read, so check this out for a solid thriller. The next book I read was The Silent Patient. This book I loved for the first half of it, I want to say. Like, I was super, super into it. I think what this book does really well is it's very atmospheric. It has a very spooky feel to it that I really liked. I really vibed with the writing style on this one. I only gave this book a 4 stars for 2 main reasons. Number 1, I did guess the ending kind of early on, and that kind of spoiled the surprise for me. However, if I had not guessed the ending of this book, I'm pretty sure I would have given this book 5 stars, but kind of not being surprised by the ending, I feel like I can't give a mystery thriller 5 stars if I don't have a big personal surprise myself. So I took off a point for that. And then also just something I didn't love is towards the ending, it felt like it got a little bit more detective-y. Like, the main character would go to one character and try to figure out some information. And then every chapter, it seemed like he was just going to another person, and a little bit more of like a detective kind of way that I just wasn't super jiving with. So yeah, that was another reason why I gave it 4 stars. But overall, super solid. I would definitely recommend this book, especially if you like kind of those spooky, eerie kind of vibes. Now, the next book I read was another one on Audible. This is called The Polygamous Daughter, and this is a true story. It's a memoir about a girl who was a daughter into a polygamous family where she is one of like 50 or 70 children or something. I don't remember the exact number, but basically there's so many kids, she doesn't even know her dad, and she has to spend a lot of her life on the run, basically switching between different living situations, moving around all the time, and she goes through a lot of really traumatic stuff in her life. I think the story was interesting. However, I only gave this one a 3 stars just because I feel like it was kind of maybe missing something for me in terms of like a plot, or I don't know, like I feel like there wasn't enough of like a story arc for me to get really excited about it. I feel like it just kind of listed things that happened throughout her life, and I don't know, it was just kind of missing something for me to make it like a 4 or 5 star book that I really love. But that being said, I did enjoy it. 3 stars for me is still solid. It means that I thought it was good. I enjoyed the reading experience. It just wasn't super memorable for me. So yeah, that was 3 stars. Okay, and then saving the best for last, my very favorite book of the month, and this may be one of my very favorite books of the entire year, is 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. I don't know how to say her name. Basically, this is a narrative nonfiction about 3 real women who, basically the best way to describe it is each of them have gone through some sort of taboo sexual relationship, basically. So the first woman, when she was in high school, she had a relationship with her teacher. The second woman ends up having an affair on her husband. And then the third woman ends up having like threesomes with her husband and then other people. What I really loved about this book is that even though I've personally never experienced any of these situations personally, I felt like I could relate to every single woman who was in the book. I think the author did a really great job of making each of the stories feel really real and really raw and honest. And I really liked that. It wasn't about sensationalizing their stories or about turning them into freak shows or glorifying what they were doing or anything like that. It was really about exploring the gray area of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's right and what's wrong. And it wasn't about like judging these women and saying, you know, this is not right. It was about exploring their situations. And I feel like this book kind of reinforced the idea that you really cannot judge someone's life by what it seems like on the outside. You know, maybe it seems like they have this cookie cutter life, or maybe you think that you know everything there is to know about a person's life. But I think this book really did a great job exploring the gray area that that's not true pretty much ever. So I really loved it. I would highly recommend Three Women. And it was a great way to finish the month. So that's it. If you've read any of these books, let me know down in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts about them. Do you agree with my ratings? Did you have completely different thoughts about them? I would love to know. Let me know down in the comments. And that's it. Bye, guys.